Many of you may have heard Luke MacDonald before. Luke is a self-described citizen science who has a great deal of concern and empathy for those who are working to try and improve our environment. He also has an unbelievable entrepreneurial mindset that extends to his passion for service. So he applies the kinds of things that we know of as being such a valued characteristic for entrepreneurs to his service work. And he told me that his dream had been to own a store. He is part owner of the Aerobics First sports store focused on shoes in Halifax. But once he got to that point, he realized that in fact his passion is much bigger than owning a store, and it relates to helping others. And the store really provides the vehicle for him to be able to do that and support some of his life satisfaction. So we're very pleased that Luke, who is a recent awardee of a Rotary International Award for the work that he does with polio, to join us, because he has some very creative ways that, while we're not suggesting that everybody on this call can do exactly the kinds of things that Luke does, some of the ways of thinking differently and having those sparks happen in your head as things occur to you to do something new and different. We're also joined by Pamadou, who is in the Gambia this morning, and he will have some contributions to the conversation as well, because Luke has been working with him for some time. And we have folks that are joining us today for the first time. We've also gone to Facebook Live for this presentation, so we have some folks there. And what I will encourage people to do, because we will have everybody muted, is to put your questions in the chat box if you have them, and we'll be happy to address them as the time proceeds. So I'm going to move forward and say welcome, Luke. Luke is at his home, Hamadou is at his home, and we're going to start. I have a few photographs as well, and so thank you, Luke, for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much for having me. It's exciting.
Well, we're just delighted, because when we've talked a number of times, the linkages that spark in your head from one thing to another are just amazing to me. And I know that you've had so many ideas and you've had a number of projects, and I've got a slide up that helps us see one of the first things that involved Rotary. And this is a case where you got involved in a project where you really recognized that it was important to know what a community really wants. We often think that the need is the most important thing to start with, but in fact, you've backed that up a little bit and started with what they really want. And this is in the Gambia. Can you just tell us a little bit about how that whole concept of starting with the spark that got you going, and how it was the wants that were really key?
Okay, that's a really good lead in. So in the top left-hand quadrant of the picture that you see, you'll see Pamadou raising his hands with Erin Poirier, who's also raising her hands. So she, at that time, was running. She had decided that she was going to run across the Gambia, which is 250 kilometers long, and it's a sliver country along the Gambian River inside Senegal. And so she walked into the store one day as if she knew me really well, and as if I would know her really well, but I really didn't know her at all. But you know, I've been selling shoes for decades, and so some people have a tendency to think that I should know them, but often I don't. So anyway, she strolls in and she says, "Luke, I'm going to run across the Gambia." And I said, "Hold it. Where's the Gambia?" She said, "It's inside a sliver country called Senegal." I said, "Where's Senegal?" And she says, "Oh my gosh." She said, "It's in Africa." And I said, "I know where Africa is." And so we just had a little bit of a laugh, and all of a sudden, you know, we just sort of clicked right away. And then she told me why she was doing it. And basically, it's a very gender-wise, it's a little bit behind the times, we'll say. And she was going to be running across the Gambia in a pair of running shorts and a shirt, and that's about it. And that was going to be a little bit controversial right from the get-go. And I said, "Holy mackerel, I'm in. If you're going to do that, what do you need?" And I gave her 5 pairs of shoes, 5 singlets, 5 shorts, all kinds of goo to eat and stuff along the way. And we had another great conversation. But what was going on in my head was, wouldn't it be cool if my daughter Bria got to experience what she's going to do? And the cool thing at that time was that Erin is a very good writer. She was very familiar with Twitter and Facebook and social media. And I was a Neanderthal. So I didn't know this stuff. And I said, well, I can learn how to do this. I can learn how to do that. I'll follow her post. This will be a great story. And I'll get Bria to follow her. because she'd be like a strong female mentor for my daughter to watch do something extraordinary. And so that's just the front end of it. So I did give her one request though. I asked her for one thing. I said, for all this stuff, I want you to do one thing. My BlackBerry plan had just run out and I was about to get a new phone. So I had this old phone that was perfectly good. I said, if you give this, I said, would you give this to the coolest person you meet on your travels in the Gambia? And when you give it to that person, see if they'll give me a call. And if they give me a call, I'm going to fall in love with them and I'm going to work with them for the rest of my life. And that's how I met Pa Madhu, who's on the line with us right now. And that's 10 years ago. So what's your side of the story there, Pa?
Pa, you on?
Yeah, thank you very much, Luke. Hello to everyone. It was in 2011, actually. I could still remember this. So when I got the phone, I think for the most part, I was really excited about the phone, but I didn't really know that the next part of having the phone was in fact more exciting. And that was the part, that was the part that I called Luke. When I called him, because it was totally strange, like I'm gonna call somebody that I didn't really know. We've never met or anything of that sort. So I was like, when I call him, what's gonna happen? But when I called him, like we had that click with regards to what we think and what we want to do and all whatnot. So everything was basically, for me, like it was crazy that, how much, we clicked within a short period of time as to what he wanted and what I wanted and how we fused up together. And that was really phenomenal. Really, thank you.
So you get a phone out of the blue from somebody from the other side of the world and you call them and you develop this relationship. So Luke, where did that go from there? Because that's a bit extraordinary. Don't think too many people have done that. So how did that take you to the next step?
Okay, so the next step was I run programs in Halifax called Start to Finish, which are running and reading programs in a couple of the toughest schools in Halifax. One is Joey McKay and the second one was Harborview in Dartmouth. And so I had a group of our Start to Finish kids have a phone call with Pa and his kids in his school. So the picture you see in the top right is the first girl to talk to us and to talk to our school. And when the two schools were talking together, they're asking questions back and forth. Our kids sat around like lumps. And their kids were so excited to speak to our kids, it was incredible. And so after the phone call, I sort of got mad at them. I said, who are the poor kids here? And look at all the stuff that you guys just described you had. You had soccer balls, you had footballs, you have hockey gear, you have all this stuff. And they have one ball for 2,300 kids and a big sandy field. And they were excited. And you guys were lumps. And I was sort of looking at them. And then two of the girls that were sort of the leaders, and they could be good leaders or bad leaders at any particular moment, these two girls. And I said, and you two, you guys didn't even pay attention. And then they turned to me and said, Luke, oh, well, we were paying attention. We want to give them all our Start to Finish sneakers that you give us. And like I went, oh my God, I can't do that. But holy mackerel, were they ever listening? And I didn't realize it. And I said, this is something extraordinary just happened. What can we do about this? And Pa Madhu was thinking the same thing on the other end. What was your thoughts about that first call, Pa?
Unmute again there.
Okay, thank you. So it was for me, it was basically my first experience. And to be honest, right, because based on the twinning that we wanted to do, the idea was to for them to have that cultural exchange, like what you do in the school and how you have your classes and all whatnot. So it was a totally different cycle. But when this kid came out with this idea, it was just blown off. And like the excitement in the students at St. Charles Luanga, like, to be honest, like I don't even think there is any word that can describe this. But what was more important at the time was how these kids really enjoyed this session of talking to some other kids from around the world that they never met, they don't know about. They're basically from different backgrounds, different cultures, norms and values and all whatnot. And that actually brought, for me, it was like it gave back to our, how to call it, the charity that we created over here, which we call the Father Tony Palmer Solar Hub. And then, we just call it, the best way we can describe it is to make fun things happen. And that is exactly how we did it. So basically the kids had fun, but then they were able to develop something out of that fun thing, from each other's angle, and they were able to learn from each other. I think that was really amazing.
So you took a phone, you connected kids around the world, you started talking about sports gear, and somehow we've got a solar hub. How did that step happen, Luke?
Okay, and so you have to remember, this is in no way chronological. So I'm going to jump around a little bit because that's the way my mind rolls. So what had happened, ironically, when I was just meeting Pa and I was just sending over the phone, his phone was never charged and the communication was terrible. And we tried to talk when we could talk. We didn't know Facebook very well that time, and it was just very sporadic. Another gentleman named John Carson runs an organization called Run for Life. He had just been introduced to plastic roll-up solar panels. And I said, oh my God, how much are those things? And he said, they're about $2,000. And I said, oh, geez, that's way more than I thought. But then, a year previous, my uncle, who's Father Tony, as in Father Tony Pomadou Solar Hub, he left me $1,000 in his will because he had passed the year previous, and I got $1,000. And all of a sudden, I was halfway there. At the same time, I meet a gentleman named Neville Guilfoy at the Blue Nose Marathon. And he says, and we end up, having one of those click moments. We became friends really quickly. He said, and I told him this story, he said, come to the Rotary. And just like with the Gambia, I said, well, what's the Rotary? Well, he said, it's a little club inside another club. I just laughed to myself. And so anyway, I went there and I just told him this great big story. And then Neville stood up and said, Luke, you didn't ask for any money. I said, am I supposed to ask for money? He said, yeah, ask for money. How much do you need? I said, I need $1,000. And they wrote me a check for $1,000. And I said, what? And so all of a sudden I had $2,000. I bought the solar panels, sent them over with someone that was traveling from here to there in a suitcase, which you see in the bottom left. And I rolled it out to Pomadou. So this was the trouble for Pomadou. He looked at it and he said, how come my name's on this sign? I said, well, my uncle is a funny priest. When I met him as a kid, I really realized his sense of humor because I was about 8 years old when I really fell in love with my uncle, because he got out of his car and he was driving a Dodge Demon just to be funny. And I thought that was the funniest thing ever. Here's a Catholic priest driving a Dodge Demon just to poke people in the eye. Yeah. And so what I told Pa was, I said, listen, my uncle, he was a prankster, he was a priest, and he loved irony and he loved opposites. And I said, so I put your name on this project because he's a dead white Catholic priest and you're a black Muslim in the Gambia. And I said, you couldn't be more opposite unless you're a girl. and that's one of the reasons we hit it off. But also, I sort of knew secretly, strategically, that Pomadou was going to be significantly attached to this thing for the rest of his life because that's what I wanted. We needed a relationship that would last forever. And so that's setting the stage for a relationship that we have, which is like, I call him the big boss and he calls me the bigger boss and I call him Boss Infinity.
So you've taken now the phone has extended to a solar panel so people can keep their phones charged, and then you've then gone, and there we are with the shirts that the kids had, because you sent them balls and shirts. I know we're jumping around a bit, but then it ended up being water. How did that happen?
Well, what had happened, I'll just lead it up. So that's what they want that turns into what they need. And I wasn't really purposefully thinking about this. It's just in retrospect how I think about it now. So you create the want, which is the actual trust. And once you trust each other and you know you're going to be hanging around, then you can still start to work towards the need. So when we had all these soccer uniforms going on there, because we didn't buy the fancy ones, we bought pennies so as many kids could play as possible. But what we didn't know was that all the kids from the surrounding areas on the weekends would play soccer. And explain what would happen then, Pa.
Yeah, so what happened after that was then we have all the kids coming to the school to come and play soccer at the sandy field. And then the water that they have in the school actually got drained because then the kids play and they get tired and they come back and drink. So before we realized it, we realized that you're basically creating some other kind of a problem because now the school is going to have problems of water. And that was when like we had a communication, myself and Luke, and then the issue of having a reserve water tank came into the picture. And that was how he spoke to Rotary over there. And then we were able to be, they actually provided us with money to get, the water tower. And I'm sure, Luke can say a little bit more on that.
Yeah, well, the heartstring story behind that, as we're trying to put this project together, it took about a year to get together. And sadly, during that time, Pa's little sister, Mama, she got a waterborne illness, we think, and she died the week before we opened the first drink, before our first girl, Bintu, had the first drink. So she died of a waterborne disease the week we were opening what we now call the Mama Sar Fountain of Youth. And if you look closely at that picture, you'll see a Rotary picture of it on it. You'll see the Father Tony Pomadou logo. You'll see Tim Deal, who did the graphic design. You'll see Aerobics First on it. And now it's named after Mama, and Pa now has a little girl who's 3. Her name is Mama Junior. And so that's the heartstrings linkage to the importance of water and the irony of this happening. And this was also the week that I returned from the Gambia to do a talk at the Nova Scotia Gambia Association to 400 people. And I found out the day before, and I had to announce what had happened to this particular group of significant players in the Gambia. It was very sad, but in the long run, it was also very awesome and powerful that there's a legacy for Pa's little sister.
So we've gone from phone, we've had shirts, we've had balls, now we've got a water tower, we've got solar panels. This is a long-term play for you. I think that's a really important piece of this story, that this is something that's long. You've said it's for life that you're doing this. And so you've got that initial enthusiasm that sometimes I think makes people think there's an urgency, this is all got to happen now. But I don't think that's how you think.
No, well, it's one of the things I have to predicate almost all my talks with is don't misinterpret my enthusiasm for urgency, because I can appear to be like, oh, it's got to get done now. No, something has to be done quickly to set the stage for movement when you actually have to run fast, because sometimes you have to run fast and sometimes you have to wait a year. It's like we're going through a time that, I recognized fairly early that was going to be devastating. And so, on the Rotary projects that came to a head because of, we're not going to have the Rib Fest, and last year was a disaster, it's easy to acquiesce and say, we won't need money for a couple of years and we'll do something ourselves, knowing that in 4 years' time, maybe we need a little bit more money. But in the meantime, we can still continue what we're doing, but in micro ways. We'll just make it small for a while, we'll hibernate. And then if you're thinking for a lifetime, you just let it grow and it gets better anyway. So there's great opportunity in this time to think through a lot of the problems that we have and then negotiate how you want to travel out of them in the future.
So speaking of starting small, I love the paperclip story, and some people may have heard it, but if you could give us just a quick overview of how the paperclip story relates to starting small and what you've done in terms of the shoe project and how that's taken off from a little thing to a big thing.
Yeah, well, that's sort of truth. Like that's an underlying theme of this whole thing. People might have recognized me as being relatively competitive, and I had this paperclip story in my head for a long time, where this guy traded a paperclip and he up traded it like 8 or 10 times, and he ended up with a house, and then he traded his house for a paperclip cottage. His name is Kyle MacDonald, no relation, but us Scottish folks we're pretty frugal and we like to build stuff. So anyway, he traded the paperclip, and I said, I can beat that, because I had this shoe, and I call this, originally I called it the $5,000 shoe, but it was one of the shoes that I'd given to kids, a kid in particular, at our running and reading program. And I didn't recognize the kid, but I recognized the shoe, and I said, where'd you get the shoe? He said, I got it from my big brother. And he handed me down. I said, your big brother, you're 6 feet tall and you're 11 years old. I said, take that shoe off. He takes the shoe off, and a size 13 foot comes out of a size 9 shoe. And it had been handed down from the big brother to the middle brother to the little brother, who's 6 feet tall. And so I just grabbed him a pair of size 13 shoes out of a regular inventory, and I gave him those, and he just went on. But what happened was a guy named Carl Daniels saw or heard about that transaction. He said, how do you do this, Luke? And how did you just give away a brand new pair of shoes for nothing out of your inventory? And I told him how I did it. I said, some little kid that wins a race in the youth running series, next week isn't going to win a shoe. I said, this guy needed the shoe. That kid doesn't. And he goes, wow. And then he cut me a check for $5,000 for the program. And then I said, oh, I have a $5,000 shoe. I said, I just beat the paperclip guy. What can I turn this into? And so now in the warehouse, over the last, this is 6 years ago or 7 years ago that happened, but that $5,000 story is a portion of a $370,000 story, because since then, Aerobics First has given approximately 4,000 pairs of brand new shoes to homeless people quietly throughout Halifax and Nova Scotia, Gambia, Cameroon, and Kenya. And so that's the paperclip story. But you also have to think about, and I'm going to go to the end now, you have to also think about that with the Spark bikes, and a lot of Rotarians were involved with that as well. That went from one bike in Joey McKay to 6,800 bikes that are now around the world. That's $3.7 million worth of bikes, plus $370,000 worth of shoes. This is now a $4 million shoe.
Amazing. Yeah.
That's the paperclip story.
Paperclip. So you've leveraged that to sort of a corporate litter kind of idea as well. That I know we'll talk about more, but maybe that fits here to just say how that links to the other connections that you've made, because you're always thinking about how does this go to the next thing.
Yeah. So you think about the corporate litter, and you think, in the bottom left-hand corner, when I started this project, it was just like we ended up giving away our old product from Aerobics First. And so we got good marketing from giving that away. So that's a value. And then another local organization said, well, we have this couple hundred pairs of shoes. Will you take these off our hands, and will you give those away on our behalf? And we said, absolutely. And we just did that really quietly because they didn't want it advertised. So we just gave them away and quietly went away. But once I had that particular picture, I knew that at some point, one of the CEOs of one of the companies that Aerobics First deals with would contact me. And lo and behold, about a year and a half, maybe 2 years later, a gentleman named Brad Markova contacted me from Wolverine Worldwide, and under which Saucony is a banner. That's one of our big shoe companies. He said, Luke, I see what you're doing on Facebook, and I see these odd pictures. Tell me what you're doing. And I told him what he's doing. I said, listen, we have some overstock here. I got 800 pairs of boots that aren't perfect. Will you take them from me? I said, absolutely. And so he sent me 800 pairs of Gore-Tex boots. The Gore-Tex boot is $250 a pop. And then I said, oh my jumpins. New Balance, Saucony is about 10% of our total business. New Balance is about 30%. What will New Balance do? 6 months later, 3,000 pairs, brand new shoes. And so that started the ball rolling, and now we have some shoes coming in consistently, but it's a little bit sporadic because we don't know what sizes, it's like a grab bag. And so what we did is we organized those out at Beacon House in Sackville, because they'll warehouse them for free, and we treat shoes like food. They energize and they take about 6 to 8 months to digest. And so we have a system that's built into a food bank as opposed to other outlets. And that's been the best means to distribute them. And so that's the corporate litter. When the warehouse space is more valuable than the product that's in it, the product is litter or waste, or it could go to landfill. The younger CEOs these days, they cannot bring themselves to throw this stuff in the landfill, because in the old days used to cut it. So I don't deal with CEOs that are over 60, but if they're almost into grandfatherhood or grandmotherhood, they're more likely to give it up to try to do something backwards, because they don't want to have a legacy of being the worst age group sort of in the world that have put us on a trajectory to what we're actually in now, which is a disaster.
So I jumped ahead on your slide, but I'll go back. But you started this idea where the warehouse space being filled with out-of-date product or things that people didn't want was actually corporate litter. And you started that with the Blue Nose idea. So maybe just tell a little bit about that, and then we'll go back to the other slide.
Well, yeah, and that's thanks for drawing me back there, because it was when I saw the Blue Nose shirts in the Blue Nose warehouse that I saw 5,000 or 6,000 shirts. I saw 5,000 or 6,000 medals, and they're taking up so much space, they frustrated the warehouse owner. And I just asked them, would it be better if I freed up their space and took all that stuff off their hands? And they said that would be great, just talk to the Blue Nose people. And then the Blue Nose people said, well, we couldn't throw them in the garbage, and we couldn't give them away here, because then people wouldn't have earned them. And I said, I can get people to earn them. I'll send them to my buddy Palmadou in the Gambia, and he'll distribute them to people for doing acts of kindness. And so all of a sudden that shirt turned from being litter, it turned into currency, because people would pick up litter and do acts of kindness for a shirt or a medal. And that's where Palmadou comes in terms of how he leveraged himself up in his community by providing this stuff. And Pa should jump in and talk about the UNESCO clubs that he's now president of.
Thank you, Luke. So somewhere along the line, when we got the stats from Luke over there, of course, from Bruno's Marathon, then I became elected because I'm a UNESCO volunteer in here. And then we had an election, and I was elected to be the president to run the affairs of the National Federation for the Gambia UNESCO Clubs and Centers. So this is a UNESCO youth-based organization that is basically having, in the Gambia, we have about 54 UNESCO clubs in schools and communities. And we also have 2 radio stations that we own, of course, courtesy of UNESCO, as well as 2 education and resource centers. So we use those places, especially the clubs that we have in the schools and the communities, to actually ask them to do what we call the World Litter Run, which was an initiative that was done by Luke from that end, but we now have to do it over here in order to keep our, the place clean. So what we do is we use that as a leverage. You want to clean the environment, we'll give you this shirt, which is the one I'm wearing right now. So we'll give you this as a way of getting you to clean your environment. The idea is to get people to start good practices, and then it becomes a part of them, and then they sustain it. And that also falls into the line of what we have discussed before, myself and Luke, as a plan to make sure that like in 10 years at a time, we're able to have a clean, very clean Gambia.
Fabulous. Luke. Okay, I'm going to go back to the litter part now, because that actually leads us into what I'd mentioned at the beginning, that you turn litter, you leverage litter. Not many people, I mean, we all get annoyed when we see litter. I pick up litter every day with my dogs, but we get annoyed about it. I don't think most people make that leap to think, how can I monetize this? So talk a little bit about the World Litter Run and how that's working.
Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is actually the waste of energy if you're mad when you're picking up. So for me, when I'm picking up litter, what I'm actually doing is I'm helping that little piece of litter get to its buddies so it can hang out in the trash can with its litter buddies. And so I don't care about who threw it there. I just want to give the world a hug, which gives me a positive serotonin hit. And so you have to set the stage for this. You have to go into it giving the world a hug, not being angry at the person that put it there. It's a complete message.
I'll work on that. That's a great message, Luke. This idea of giving the world a hug by picking up litter is an incredible concept. So keep going.
And so somehow I wanted Tim Hortons involved, because I was angry with Tim Hortons. I used to drive by the Tim Hortons on Caldwell Road, and it would be lined up down Caldwell Road, and I could be late for work. And I'd be on the verge of road rage, and I'm a pretty nice guy. And I'm saying, oh my God, this is gonna. And then one day I'm doing a bike out Bissett Road, and I see a pod, and a pod is a moving station so that you can move the stuff out of your house into the pod. When it's in the pod, it moves to a new place. And so the Rotary story behind that was when the Syrian refugee situation was happening about 3 years ago, I knew the owner of the pod's company. And what he did is he took a pod and put it on a cul-de-sac in Bedford, and he put a hit list or a scavenger hunt list of everything that would be needed in an apartment in this pod. And so the community went in and everybody picked up something. They filled the pod within the day, which filled an entire apartment for a refugee family. I said, that's the coolest thing I've ever heard. And so I'm driving by this pod and I just had this huge smile. I said, this is awesome. I love that guy. And then the next thing I see is a Tim Hortons cup thrown on the road. And I immediately thought about the lineups that I'm in and how much I hate Tim Hortons. And I said, my whole ride is going to be ruined if I think like this, because I'm going to see a Tim Hortons cup every 10 feet. I have to think of a marketing slogan for them before I see my next cup. 30 feet later, there's a cup. And I think, okay, how do I change this? I said, Sidney Crosby, he's from Cole Harbour. He's friggin' awesome, great community leader. Camp days, they have camp days for thousands and thousands of kids all across Canada. They do Tim Hortons, 270,000 kids a year go through Tim Hortons camps. I said, this is an awesome company owned by local people. They're not a big company. They look big, but they're local, so it's confusing. So how do we do that? And so I said, don't tarnish the cup. Let's treat that cup like it's the Stanley Cup. I want to pick that up. I want to save those Stanley Cups, and let's figure this out. And so then I started to count them, and I did one pickup where I only picked up cups on Caldwell Road. In about an hour, I picked up 500 cups, and 74.1% were Tim Hortons cups. And I said, okay, I'm tagging Tim Hortons on everything until one of the owners contacts me and asks me what I'm doing. And so 4 years later, which was 3 months ago, Tim Baker, who owns the Tim Hortons on Caldwell Road, Baker Drive, and Autoport Main Road and Eastern Passage, he contacted his district coordinator or operations coordinator, who's a friend of mine in running. And he says, hey, Matt, who's this guy that's picking up the litter? Can you hook me up with him? He said, yeah, as a matter of fact, I know, it's Luke. And the next day, Tim, he texts me, he says, Luke, I'm the new owner of these Tim Hortons. Can you explain to me what you're doing? I said, sure, I'd love to come meet you. And I said, what time? He said, well, I finished my rounds of the store where I load up all the stock for the store at 10 o'clock. And I said, okay, great. What time do you start loading up your stores? He said, 7. I said, I'll see you at 7. And then for 3 or 4 weeks, for the next 3 or 4 weeks, until we couldn't because of COVID, I helped him load the stores. And then we had 2 or 3 hours together every Tuesday morning. And then we got to know and like each other. He happens to be the former drummer for Matt Mays, just a great guy, very musical. He says, Luke, how about I give you all my recyclables for End Polio Now? I said, that's great. Here's his first $50. How much is that? That's $150 for End Polio Now. So he just approximately bought 50 vaccines for kids. He himself, and he knows it. And is he ever proud? And so that's just a wiggle into the door of Tim Hortons. And now the concept is going up the chain, and we have all the infrastructure we need to do it. We just need a coalition of the willing to blow this thing up, and which is the reason why I'm on this Zoom in the first place, to see, how can we give the world a hug, make a lot of money for End Polio Now, have it tripled, which is also going to reinforce the superhighway that Bill Gates has built for vaccinations, because that's the same highway the COVID vaccine is going to come down.
Amazing. So you're picking up litter, you're taking pictures of all this litter, you're part of an app project where it's tracking it. And so people actually see this and have a sense of what they're doing, and you're able to monetize it. So can you
that's right. So I threw in the flowers there just so everybody didn't need an aspirin. So if you can't stand the slide, just stare at the flowers. And so if you see the first slide with the calculator on it, what I did is I calculated, I think it's 1,400 or 1,500 Tim Hortons items that I picked up, and I put a value of 4 cents on them. So 4 cents times 1,500 is approximately $60. And if that gets tripled, that's $180 for End Polio Now. And this is all in theory, so I want to be careful with that. So if you extrapolate that, I said, well, what if they actually paid for every piece of litter I ever picked up and counted, which is 23,908 pieces at 4 cents each? That's $956.16. If you triple that, that's $2,868. That's a fair chunk of change. That's almost 1,000 polio vaccines. And then what happens with Tim Hortons? They say, "Holy mackerel! Look what we're doing," and they tell their staff that, and the staff says, "Holy mackerel! Look what we're doing," and they get a new experience in their store. They're not just working for money; they're working for polio and what we're doing, and that's already happened. You know, because Tim's already given me money. You know, when I get off this call, I'm going to ramp this up into End Polio Now and on my Rotary thing, and I'm going to go by Tim's place and wave, "Hey Tim, guess what? There's $150 in the bank." And so I think this is leverageable, just like the one bike is now 6,800 bikes. The one shoe is now 4,939 pairs of shoes and 1,000 in weight. And so all this leverageability, it's not already done. It's just, let's just go do it. It's fun, which is why I hang out with Pomadou.
So we talked about the piece with the shirts and leveraging that, and this corporate leverage. I'm not sure if there was anything else around the whole corporate leverage idea, or getting into this thought of there's a lot of different kinds of litter. So you're not just talking about litter on the street. We heard you were talking about corporate litter with stuff in warehouses, and that led you to talk to, obviously the mayor here is interested in that. Is there more to that part of the story before we go to I think there's one more.
Well, that particular picture is a few years ago, and because of the mayor's, he's just a really intuitive guy. And he said, "Luke, I want you to come in and I want you to tell me exactly what you're doing." And he said, "I will help you in any way that I can." And this is when he just became mayor. And I said, "Holy mackerel, now there's a leader." And just along the way, he could give me a little poke or put his arm around me and give me a noogie. He is just a tremendous guy. And so he gave me a little help at the Rotary conference that we had here in Halifax, where he picked up his speech, his preamble, he crumpled it, and then he talked about the Sparks Fly program and the Spark bikes. And then Wayne from Labrador ended up buying, I don't know how many bikes, but he started out with 8 or 9, and it ended up with 30, and more and more. And so that's the little things that Wayne did. And then this is sort of just a recap of what litter is. Litter to me is a waste of energy. Okay, so you have a classroom and you have one kid that's upset and they start to knock things down and things like that. A lot of the energy of the teacher then goes to the kids, and the other kids lose out on the expenditure of that energy. So what if we calm that kid in the classroom and we balance the class so that there's an even distribution of energy given from the teacher to each kid? And that concept worked because I linked up with the Merit Center and a gentleman named Dr. Stuart Shanker and Dr. Susan Hopkins, and they really liked the way I thought. And then they started to promote the Sparks Fly bikes in a very quiet way when they talked about their self-regulation model and how to calm a kid in order to get them ready to learn. And so that's how this whole thing propagated, to the point at which, in the bottom right, I'm in a school in Doha. I spoke to 1,500 kids there, each group of different age groups. And my link into the door there was that they knew that I was the guy that started Sparks Fly. But when I started Sparks Fly and the 7,000 bike thing, they wanted me over there to talk about litter. So they paid my way over, and then they did a fundraiser in lieu of a fee for $3,000. And that $3,000 has just purchased toilets, which were built 6 months ago, and another set about to be built in ESAL, which is Pamadou's school he went to when he was a kid. And Pamadou managed that whole project, and we're halfway through providing toilets to St. Charles Alonga as well.
So Luke, this is an amazing story, and I'm going to remind people we're just coming to the end. So please put your questions if you have any in the chat, and we'll ask Holly in a minute if there are any there for Luke. But I'm hoping that people are seeing that there's some different thinking here. This isn't to say that everybody should go out and deal with shoes and soccer balls and so on. But what I'm hoping you might see is that this started with Luke having a BlackBerry that he no longer used, sending it to somebody and starting a conversation and building some trust and finding out some things he could do, as well as this incredible thinking around being entrepreneurial and having leverage and leveraging one pair of shoes to something else. Now we just heard him talk about leveraging Spark bikes that got him to where he was going, to some funds that led to toilets being built for a school. Like it's the dots just are really complicated to try and connect, but I'm hoping people are seeing just a different way of thinking about service and about litter. And I think, Luke, might be good for you to just speak a little bit while we get any other questions coming in about the app and the picking up litter piece and how you see that extending to other people.
Yeah, so the biggest problem I had with the Spark bikes was that all the people in power, all they wanted was data. And they said, show me the science on this. And I say, what science do you need that exercise will help kids? Are you crazy? Of course it's going to help. But I didn't do well in school. So the scientists blocked the road to the people with money. And so what I did is I raised money individually, one bike at a time. People were dropping off $800 or $900 at the store, and I was just buying bikes for everything until the point at which the school board couldn't take it anymore. And they came in and said, okay, Luke, what are you doing? And so that got me in there. And so that was sort of, you know, how you have to sort of work in. But the overlying thing, in order to make this really simple, is that my job at Aerobics First is to reduce community stress through exercise and action. So every project is to reduce stress. How do we reduce stress with a homeless person that's treated like litter? Pop a pair of shoes on them, because that's what I'm good at. How do I reduce the anxiety in classrooms, which I suffered from terribly in school and I couldn't get through school? Give them a Spark bike. How do I reduce my own stress in the simplest possible way to help me and my serotonin need? I pick up a little piece of litter. And then with a little piece of litter, everybody in the world has access to that. So the people that have nothing in the most desperate situation, in the places with the most poverty, they can still give the world a hug, and they have something to give back just by picking up a piece of litter. That's why there's a revolution of litter picking going on. Anybody can do it. And if you don't do it, it's simply because you're lazy or there's COVID going on.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So there's opportunities everywhere in order to raise up a little bit and give people a hand up.
Yeah. So can you just explain just quickly about the app that you're...
Yeah, the Literati, that's a great comeback again. The Literati, when I started this next sort of wave, I said, I'm going to come in with science and data so that I can tell Tim Hortons that 74.1% of the cups I pick up are your cups. I could tell every brand because I tag every piece of litter that I do, and that 24,300, that's only about 20% of the actual litter I pick up. But I tag it, and that will give me the data on what litter and what type of litter is everywhere. And that's something that's very valuable for municipalities. So there's a couple municipalities like San Francisco where the app started, where they get $4 million a year in tax collection for the cost of picking up each butt from the cigarette companies. And so the municipality could look at this and they could take it on and they could say, oh, look at the data that we have on this stuff. Let's go figure out ways to do it. Just like I figured out a way maybe to do it individually with one Tim Hortons owner. If it can work on the micro, it probably can work somehow on the macro.
Yeah.
It's just people have to be willing to try, and you have to be willing to negotiate, and you have to be willing to take a long time to do it.
Fabulous. Holly, questions that we have on chat? Let's take a couple of questions.
Sure. The first question is from Fred. If you want to ask your question, Fred. And I'll unmute you. There you go.
Fred, you can ask your question yourself, or Holly, you can read it out if it's there.
Holly can read it out.
Okay. We're really interested, is your logo on your sweatshirt is significant?
Oh, that logo on this shirt is significant because it's A1, which is for aerobics first. And ironically, it's also the very first store I worked in was A1 athletic wear. And so I like circles. So I think it's really cool that I started my career 40 years ago last week at A1 athletic wear selling shoes. And now I own A1, which is also known as aerobics first. So there is a deep significance to it because I thought I would never be employable because I was so bad at school. And so I said, I'm going to have to create my own work forever so I never have to worry about being unemployed unless there's a pandemic.
Thanks, Luke. Holly, what else do we have?
Yeah, our next question is from Wade. No, sorry, Don McKenzie. How are you getting money from Tim's? Are they paying you to return the cups?
Well, he does. He literally comes to the store and drops them at the store. I take them to, well, I used to take them to Youth Live, but they're closed now. So I take them to the Canadian Recycling in Woodlawn. They give me the money, and then I give it, then I put it into the My Rotary Club under NPolio Now, and I donate it.
So that's the recyclables, Luke, but what about the cups? Is he doing anything, I think, is he doing anything with the cups that you're picking up from Tim's?
Right now that what we've done is we've done proof of concept with Tim. So now it's going to Matt, and we're going to see if I can get a few cents per cup in the next pickup we're going to do, which was going to be April 26th. But again, that's all off. So again, all this stuff is proof of concept. And so we don't know yet, but it's likely I'll just say, hey, this is the numbers. Here's the app. Are you guys cool with it? The information that I put up here is all stuff that I already sent into Tim Hortons for them to take up the chain. And if I decide not to do it, that's okay, because I'll just stay small and deal with Tim. And
your idea is, your intention is, just so happens that the owner's name happens to be Tim as well as it being Tim's. So your intention in working with Tim, the guy, is that they will provide you with funds based on the number of cups that you pick up, 4 cents or something per piece is what you're looking at now. Yeah.
Or even every single piece of litter.
Every piece of litter. Amazing. That's awesome. Awesome. Anything else there?
Yeah, Jeff Goodyear would like to just give a quick comment on the spin bike program in Labrador. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. And it was great to hear you mentioned Wayne King. Hi, Louisa. You mentioned Wayne King and the extension of your spin bike program. Well, Wayne bought that project to our club here in Goose Bay. We ended up purchasing, I think, around 30 odd bikes. And just to let you know that they're positioned in schools all the way from the most northerly community in Labrador and Nain, all the way south to Mary's Harbor and the Straits. So it's had an amazing impact here, and it's worked on a whole bunch of levels very positively within the club. And I would like to bring back one quick memory. Elva, do you remember when we delivered the bike to Mud Lake? And we had, the Mud Lake is a school of the thriving population of 2. And they got one of the bikes, and Elva and I threw a bike in the back of a helicopter, flew over, landed in behind the school, dumped it out in a snowbank, and left. I have it on good authority that they did pick up the bike. Anyway, thanks for the opportunity to comment.
Wow, that was an incredible trip.
Great story, Jeff. Yes, I'm sure that was an experience. Anyone else have anything that you'd like to ask or comment on, or bring to Luke or to Pamadou in the Gambia before we bring this part of the call to a close? Nothing else there, or on Facebook either. I think our Facebook Live is working as well. So I just want to thank Luke so much. I'm hoping you got the point of this. I'm hoping you saw that those connections are amazing, and that the experiences that even Jeff just talked about of what they were able to do in Northern Labrador are as a result of some different thinking. And in this time of COVID, we are going to need a lot of different thinking, because the new normal is not going to look like what we've had. And so that entrepreneurial thinking about how do we do things in a small way that can lead to something else? How do we start small with something like Luke picking up litter and ending up with this relationship that he has? How do we take that message about building trust and understanding what an organization wants to then maybe move forward and have a better opportunity to do what they need? To me, those are the real messages out of this. And Luke, I'm just so grateful that you've taken the time to share some of the many projects, and I know there are many more we could have talked about. And I'm just going to ask you very quickly, if you would. We didn't talk about this earlier, but you did something very interesting with an organization that we serve, Souls Harbor. Can you just speak to, you did a bit of a twist around how funding happens there, and that Souls Harbor actually reversed one of the things that they did as a result. And then we'll end.
Yeah, and I really only did that once because I sort of wanted to prove a point to myself. And so what had happened was, I've been giving thousands of pairs of gently used shoes to Souls Harbor for years. However, what had happened was that they changed their business model. They split their business model. So they have their restaurant and the area where they serve food, and that all our Rotarians go to, which is on Canard. But then they have Mission Mart, which is a very cool retail outlet. And they were getting shoe drop-offs there, but the shoes that were being dropped off weren't as good as the shoes I get, because I get shoes from very finicky runners. And so when their shoes are worn out, they're really not worn out much at all. And they probably still have a 6 to 8 month shelf life on them. And so, but the shoes that she was getting were horrible, but she was selling them for $10. And so I recognized that they had changed their business model. And I said, well, and I saved up a bunch of pairs of shoes. I think it was maybe 200 or 300 pairs or whatever it was. And I proposed to Michelle, I said, you're selling these for 10 or whatever. Why don't you give me $1 per shoe that I give you? And I said, but you don't give it to me. You write a check to the Rotary for $1 per pair, because you're now running a business off used shoes. So I don't think you should get them for free. I think you should pay for a bit and keep that. And she said, that's a great idea. I said, here's the upside. Your staff works with the marginalized all the time. So much so that they sort of forget that anybody's marginalized, because they're just regular people. And so then their job really often just turns to work. But what if they were supporting polio and they knew they were supporting polio? That would reinvigorate them at a job that's already awesome. And they're not even getting paid, they're volunteers, but they still get tired. And so this was a little outrigger setup, and she said, that's a great idea. And then, you know, she cut a check to the Rotary Club. I think it might've been 100, I can't remember how much it was. But that got tripled. And when I told her it got tripled, she said, wow, even the concept of a charity wanting to give back in a different way creates variety. And it's the variety of things that you do that create a better life. Not too many people try to draw their life satisfaction out of their work, but you should be taking your life satisfaction to your work. And I think that's a big switch for a lot of people.
Huge. That's a great place to end, Luke. We're almost